We are going to talk about how you can take the cash that you have and maximize it across more properties that you might want to invest in. But also, this is how I bought my first 2 homes, was using seller financing, and it worked fabulously well. So you can use it for investing or for your family or for whatever you like. It's a fantastic technique to take a little bit of money and spread it across many deals, or just to be able to not have to use your credit. That's a real big advantage. So let's get into what we're going to cover. First, we want to remind you to always assemble your team. Team is critical to success in real estate investing. You don't do anything by yourself. You always have to have somebody on this list, whether it's real estate agents or bird doggers, wholesalers, different lenders, hard money lenders, private money lenders, partners, property managers if you're going to use rentals or own rentals, handymen, contractors, title companies, attorneys, all sorts of people. So depending on what kind of technique you need, and let's just talk about seller financing specifically, obviously you need some sellers, and then you may or may not choose to use a title company. Definitely should have an insurance agent to make sure your property is insured correctly. Maybe an attorney if you'd like to close using an attorney instead of using a title company. So those are some of your basic team that you'd need for seller financing deals. What we cover in our 6-week seminars, our webinar series, is a compilation of how to do the techniques, who you need, things to watch out for. We're big fans of making sure that you're protected. So it's not just about knowing what to do on the deals, it's also knowing what to avoid and what not to do that can cost you lots of money, and can really, number one, yes, cost you money, eat through your cash, but also could get you in trouble. So you want to be very cautious when you're doing real estate, that you're doing it on the up and up, and that you have the right contracts and you have the right protection in place. So we definitely cover those aspects as well when we're teaching. So it's a 6-week webinar series that we cover all different kinds of seller financing. We're going to go over what some of those techniques are, seller financing basics, the benefits, as well as some of the cons. So you got pros and cons, lease options, contracts for deed, land contract, wraparound mortgages, buying subject to any existing liens that are already on the property. So you can do seller financing with a seller that already has a loan on the property. We'll get more specific about that a little later. And then cover exit strategies in the last week, and also do a full review, make sure you guys understand everything that you've learned. And that's the gist of what we cover in 6 weeks. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I want you to be clear that on these preview sessions, what we really want to be able to do is not only give you an overview, but we want to give you something you can take away today and use. And so as we go through these slides, you're going to see some information that's going to tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about during the 6 weeks of the seller financing webinar. But you're also going to see slides that say today's takeaway. And just want you to understand that today's takeaway is intended to give you something that you can use that would be of value to you today. Either a tool that you can put into practice right now, or something that you need to start working on and building.
Okay, perfect. Yep, I do. I want to emphasize that to you guys. Whoops, sorry about that. We want to give you some value. So if you're showing up and you're taking the time to either join us live tonight or you're watching this recording later, yes, you'll be able to see what we do and what we cover in the series, but also, like Steve said, you should have some takeaways. And I had this fantastic meditation I listened to this morning, and it was one of those that talks about what can you do today? What's one thing that you can do to get past your excuses, to get past where you're stuck right now? So I would challenge you guys as you listen to this, if you can just start with one thing and you think about doing one thing every day or a new thing every week, by the end of a year, 2 years time, your life can be radically different. So just keep that in mind, that you don't have to absorb all of this at once. In fact, in all reality, when I started real estate investing, I felt like there were a million pieces and different language than I'd ever heard. It was like a foreign language, the way that some of the investors spoke. So word by word, contract by contract, deal by deal, contact by contact, whether that's a mortgage company, a title company, a new investor you meet. These are all pieces of your puzzle that you're going to put together. So don't stress yourself out. Just listen for the one thing that sounds like, oh, I can start with that, and get yourself moved forward from wherever you are right now. So in week 1, we cover those pros and cons, some of the benefits to the sellers, some of the benefits to you as a buyer, or if you are a seller, you might own some properties and choose to sell yours this way. It can bring a higher price to you. That's one of the advantages. So whether you are the seller or someone else is, think about creating a higher return for yourself. You can act as the bank. You can even make money on somebody else's money. So if you have a property financed at 3.5%, 4% from a bank because you bought it years ago or you happen to have good credit, you could then resell it to a new buyer at 6, 7, 8%. So you can make interest over and above the interest that you're paying. That's just one way to increase the profits, but definitely getting yourself more money in the deal is one advantage as the seller. There are fewer restrictions for the buyer, which opens up the market of buyers that you can sell to. So you broaden your buyer's pool. There's less paperwork involved, generally speaking. It's much less expensive on both sides because you don't have expensive closing costs to deal with, either as a buyer and seller splitting, just as a buyer, or even seller side closing costs. With the exception, I will say that title insurance can be very, very important, whether you're the seller or the buyer, to make sure that that property, when it transfers to the new buyer, is free and clear. So that's a really good tip I'd like you to hold on to. Even if you're doing a simple contract between you and the other party, you need to make sure that the title does not become an issue at any point. And title insurance is the best way to do that. You can sell a property faster when you're offering seller financing because of these other benefits and the less paperwork and the no having to wait around to get the loan in 30 or 45 days. And that way you can just, again, broaden the pool, but not just because you're offering seller financing, but because there are people that need a house right now. So you get the right away market and you also get the down the road market. So bigger buyer pool both directions are some of the benefits to the sellers. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Just that as we go through this, we're going to go through some benefits to the seller, benefits to the buyer, and some cons to each of those. Understand that you can be a buyer and you can be a seller with seller financing, and it would benefit you either direction you go. And in some deals, you actually do some of both. And so don't look at this just from one angle. This could be a real opportunity for you to buy something as well as for you to execute an exit strategy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. So some of the cons for the seller, just to be aware of, sometimes they need to own the house free and clear because there are certain loans that are not supposed to be messed around with. And if you get a person in, if you look at that picture and they trash your house and you're the seller, you could end up having to evict them or foreclose on them. And if there are property damages, you're going to have to take those back along with the property. So think of that as a really good reason to have inspections throughout the time that they own the property. So if you sell or finance, say, for 3 years, you might want to think about doing a monthly, or sorry, not a monthly, a bi-yearly inspection. So at least every 6 months, when it's time to change batteries and smoke detectors or furnace filters or anything like that, have a good excuse and a good reason to go into the property and look and see if they're taking good care of it or if they're making it look like that picture. Benefits to the buyer. Love this one. You don't have to qualify. So generally speaking, the sellers won't even pull your credit. If they do, sometimes they want to know you're kind of in the ballpark to be prepared within the 1 to 5 years, let's say, that they are usually willing to sell or finance, that you can get your credit fixed up. But you can buy a property a lot faster. And because there's such a little amount of paperwork and that short amount of time, you literally can do these deals within a few hours if you want to. If you and the seller come to terms on the property, there's nothing stopping you unless you decide, okay, let's slow it down and take 2 or 3 days to get a good solid title search, or let's make sure we wait for one reason or another. That's up to you guys, but I just want you to understand that the speed of these can be as quick as sitting down at a table and negotiating across within an hour's time. So start to finish, walking in the house, negotiating, signing the contract, 2-3 hours, you could literally own a property that quickly. Some of the cons for the buyer, yes, usually there's a higher interest rate involved, and it's not usually for the life of the loan. So let's say 30 years. It's usually going to be a shorter time period between that 1 to 5 year time frame. So there's something called a balloon payment. Balloon payment is at the time where the seller says, okay, I'll finance you for 2 years, but anytime up to that 2 years, you need to get your own takeout loan and purchase the property. By then, you could have it fixed up, resold to somebody else. You could have your credit fixed if that's an issue for you, and buy the property then. When we bought our first house that way, it's that we didn't have the down payment money, and we didn't really understand how to use grants or down payment assistance programs or anything like that that would have covered our down payment. So we thought, well, we need 10%. We don't have 10% saved. So we found a lease option to do, and we just put $3,000 down. And then it was a very simple lease option contract. It worked great. We saved the money. Actually, that's a whole nother fun story. We ended up at the end of that year being able to buy the house and get cash back out of the loan. So we got, if I remember correctly, $34,000 or right around there as cash out of the house. So how fun would that be? You lease option a property for a year, do a cash out loan at the end, and you can actually own a property and have some cash in your pocket. So very bad credit can disqualify you for purchasing at the end. You want to make sure if you have a balloon payment and the seller isn't financing for the whole time, that you're able to get your takeout loan done, and don't wait till the last minute. You need to be looking for things to improve your credit and try to save some money along the way, so you're in a super good position to ensure that you can buy that property at the end of your term. Steve, do you want to cover today's takeaway? Any fun things that you want them to learn today? Are you there? Steve, did I lose you?
No, I was just on mute, sorry. These are just a couple of tips that we thought we could throw in, and most of it's self-explanatory. You want to be working with people, especially professionals in the business that have been around for a while, and to make sure that you get directed in the right direction. You want to treat people when you're selling, you want to treat your potential buyers or much the same way as you would a tenant. And what I mean by that is you need to screen them out, and you need to do the background checks and the criminal background checks as well as the credit checks, just to see who it is that you're pulling into your property. And when you do that, you're going to be protecting yourself from maybe a lot of problems down the road. Mm-hmm. You should be requiring a down payment and something that should cover damages, which would include a loss of time when you're not able to collect rents while you replace that tenant or while you're doing repairs. So you want to make sure that you're covered there as well. Get with CPA, work with buyers with poor credit, make sure that they are able to qualify at the end. So you kind of need to babysit your folks in a way to make sure that when that balloon payment comes due for them, that they've been taking care of what they need to in order to qualify for that loan. And if they've been working with the loan officer from the beginning and they've shown them what they need to do, they can give them realistic timeframes for getting the stuff done so that you're not left hanging at the end of the deal without somebody who can actually close on it. And at the very bottom, we've given you a couple of websites that have tools. And this is specifically for landlords, but if you're going to be doing seller financing, again, these tools will apply to you very much the same way. So there's links to doing background checks as well as links to doing credit checks and forms and etc. So check those out and see what works best for you.
Yep, excellent. Thank you. And this is another example of why you're going to need a good team, because when Steve's talking about babysitting the people to make sure that their credit gets improved, if you have a credit repair company and you've got some lenders that you trust and you put these people into their hands, then they can be babysitting them as well and making sure, number one, they're motivated because they want to get the business out of the person as well. And then you're all working as a team, so you all benefit. The person wants the loan, the buyer wants the loan, The credit repair company wants the business to be able to repair that credit, and you want to be able to sell the property. So if you can all work together and keep eyes on it, your chances greatly improve of getting that person qualified at the end. All right, so week 2, we covered lease options. That's one of my favorites, obviously, because it's close to my heart, having purchased my family properties this way. But I will tell you guys also, as an investor, I've been very diversified in the different kinds of deals I like to do. I like a good challenge, so I'm not the one that just sits and only wholesales or sits and does just lease options. But there was an investor in town here that I met at one of the real estate investing clubs, and this is all that he does. He just does a whole lease option business. So he's constantly finding sellers that are willing to sell on lease option, and then buyers that need to purchase through lease options. And he puts the two together, and he makes sure that he makes money in the middle. And that's all that he does. So you can make a whole business out of just this one technique. So when you're finding, you want to stay generally focused on vacant and abandoned properties, properties that are in foreclosure or pre-foreclosure, red tag houses that have been condemned by the city or the county, and then auctions like sheriff sale auctions, anything around where you know that you can probably get a good deal. And by the way, there are a lot of different kinds of auctions, so you want to research that, but that's a whole nother conversation as well. What to look for, how to check and make sure, what the requirements are for the auctions and the varying types. So tonight we'll just say auctions in general. And then for funding, some good ways to make these deals happen: have some private money lenders, some hard money lenders, transactional funders, and then conventional lenders as well, in order to get the takeout loans set up and ready to close at the end.
Well, and understand that when we're talking about funding here, in this case, we're looking at how do you get a property, how do you acquire a property and hold on to it and execute a lease option to a seller. And so that's was a little bit muddy there, the way that this was put together, the way I put this together. So I just wanted to clear that up for you. Why would you need funding on a deal if you're doing a lease option? Well, if you're selling the lease option, you need to be able to have the property in your name and hold on to it for a period of time, and you might need to acquire your own funding in order to do that. That's what that's about.
Yeah, this page, we could talk an hour about just this page, you guys. So just keep in mind that something like transactional funding, that's if you're only going to hold the property maybe 1 to 3 days. That's a short-term kind of loan that you can do if you've already got a takeout buyer at the end. Hard money lenders, you tend to not want to hold on to them more than 3 to 6 months on any property just because of the expense involved. But private lenders can be really, really good. If you know that you're going to pick up a lease option and you need to hold the financing or a portion of that financing, even if the seller is covering, say, their mortgage amount, they sometimes want some skin in the game from you. Sometimes it is more than $1,000 to $5,000. So if it makes sense, if the deal makes sense, there are different kinds of funding, what do you call them? Funding options that you can put on the property. And that's some of what we can walk you through if you don't understand what the differences are. And then beginning with the end in mind is really important, especially with seller financing, because it's not a normal, ordinary thing. It's very creative, and that's the wonderful thing about it, but it's also the more complicated thing about it. So if you know how you want to get rid of the property, the end in mind, then you can better connect from the beginning how you want to set yourself up. And sometimes, in fact, honestly, most times that relates to what the seller is willing to do with you. So with you as the buyer now in this situation, you're going to have that conversation with the seller, see what they're open to. Sometimes they will only go for a year or two. That's going to limit the kind of deal that you can put together. Now, if they're the kind of seller, like I helped somebody get into a house the end of last year in December, and that seller is willing to go long-term with them. That's a rarity, but it does happen. So if you've got a seller that's willing to put all that out on the table for you for 20 to 30 years, consider yourself fortunate, but also that's a really easy one to structure compared to some of these others that you might only have a year to get in alignment with. So remember, you've got to see what you have to deal with, what kind of potential buyer you have to match up with that property, and then put those pieces together. Preparing for the takeout loan means you're going to need to deal with loan officers, mortgage brokers, whatever you want to call them. They're all in the same category, especially for tonight's explanation without getting into every single detail. Just understand that there are conventional lenders. That's generally the category that we're referring to when we talk about loan officers, but that's also anything that would be a conventional mortgage. And then you have to make sure that the person at the end is getting qualified, like Steve mentioned, and you document the payment history. That might not seem like an important thing, but there have been in the past. There are a few right now, and there should be more in the future, lenders that are willing to actually let you do a refinance loan. So that's how we got the $34,000 out of the property when we first purchased, because we had a payment history for 12 months. It showed that we owned the property according to their standards, which meant we could do a refinance loan instead of a brand new loan, and that required less money down. And it also gave us the opportunity to take the cash out at closing. So knowing what loan programs are available can also help you match up super well on the properties to benefit you, definitely, but also benefit your buyer and make sure that they can get the best kind of matchup loan at the end. And then structuring the deal, you've got to know what type of seller financing you want to do. What's the difference between renting / leasing or doing an option to purchase or putting the two together so it's officially a lease option? In some states, you cannot do, like for example, in Texas, you cannot do a typical lease option. It has to be structured a little differently. So you need to know your state rules. That's another reason for team. I'm going to harp on that a little bit because I'm seeing too many people that want to just jump in there and find deals, but they don't have a team to support them. You have to have people that are professionals in the industry that you can go and ask questions to. One might be a mentor that's done that kind of thing before. One might be a mortgage broker or a loan officer. One person you might refer to is a CPA or a good tax accountant that can help give you advice about how this is going to affect you at the end when you sell it. So you're preparing again for the end, but from the beginning. Steve, what do you have to add to that?
Just a thought that there's a lot of detail here, and I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed by it, but just understand that when we go through the course, we go through this stuff with a fine-tooth comb and hopefully get it all straightened out for you. But if you're feeling that there's some questions that are coming up that we're not quite getting answered for you, just write them down, and at the end we'll go over some of that. But we're just trying to, I guess, we're trying to give you a drink through a fire hose. But we just want you to be able to look at what we are putting out here so that you know whether or not this is something that you need to get into a little deeper.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you want to be of that creative mindset. That's one thing I love about real estate. I've hardly done anything conventional. I have gotten conventional loans and I have sold to people using conventional loans. I have used the MLS. I am a realtor. Those are definitely more straight down the line conventional things. However, my first deals were very creative. I've always partnered and used private lenders. I did use hard money lenders at different times. So the more options that you have, I feel like because of all the fun options I've had available, it's opened up more doors for me. I haven't had to stay in the conventional world. And so we really want you, if you want to understand creative financing, to take this course in particular. This is definitely for somebody who's a little outside of the box, a very creative thinker, and loves to help people get out of their situations, whether that's the seller or the buyer. If the buyer's stuck with not having very good credit or doesn't even really know how to get qualified for a loan, you've got a seller that really needs to sell or is just tired of landlording. There are oftentimes good sellers that will be creative and do these seller financing deals with you because they already have tenants in the property, they already have a mortgage on the property or have it paid off, and they have the ability to be more flexible. So if you find yourself fitting in that category, this might be an excellent course for you guys to take. So sandwich lease options are just like the regular lease options, only you're doing a lease option on both sides. So if I were the investor in the middle of that sandwich, let's say I was the ham and the cheese in the middle there, The one slice of bread is a seller, the other is a buyer. So I have a lease option contract with the seller, I have a lease option contract with the buyer. That is a sandwich lease option. And we'll just leave it at that because we have a lot of slides to get through. So Steve, why don't you do today's takeaway? Are you there?
Sorry, got to get unmuted again. So this is just a suggestion to plan ahead and understand that every deal needs to have a takeout loan at the end of it. So whether you're on the buying side or the selling side, you want to make sure that you're starting to do the things that will get this done for you. And this is especially true if you're doing a sandwich lease option because you've got it coming and going. But one of the things that you can find that would be most helpful is for you to get exactly what you need to do and what your buyer needs to do or what your seller needs to do in order to make sure that everything's lined up so that when the deadline comes for the closing on the other end, everything's all the way it should be. And the best way to do that is to sit down with the loan officer and work with that loan officer throughout this process.
Excellent.
And that will really be very helpful for you in the end of making sure that that takeout loan is where it needs to be.
Let me give you just a little example, because as I'm listening to Steve and we're talking about deadlines and making sure it matches up for the seller and the buyer and you, as an example, when we teach wholesaling, we talk about finding the buyer first and then going shopping for the kind of stuff that they want. There's a reason that we suggest that. And that's because it's a lot easier to go find things that can actually be sold quickly to the investor buyers that want what you have to offer. If you do it the other direction, sure, it can still work, but sometimes you don't have enough time with a short option, let's say with a seller, to go out and find the right kind of buyer for that property. The same is true about this kind of a strategy. If you're going to lease option, it's not going to work well if the seller only gives you 18 months, but your buyer needs 2 years to fix their credit. So if you start with the buyer and you get the buyer connected with a loan officer and you find out how bad their credit really is, for example, then you can figure out how long they need to fix their credit and be ready to purchase, and then go shopping for some lease option deals. This is the way I've gotten several of my lease option buyers into properties, and it's worked out much better. Sure, they have to be patient, and I always tell them that. Sometimes I can't just go right out and find something in a week that they want. So if they're renting somewhere already and they have a month-to-month lease or something that's flexible on their end, then I can go out shopping, try to find a seller that matches what they're looking for, and then put the two together. That way my deadlines for when the buyer needs the property and can qualify are going to match better with what the seller is willing to offer. And if I have to have a long time, I can push the seller harder, where in certain situations, I only need 6 months to a year to help somebody get their credit ready and get into a property. So that leaves the door much more wide open with sellers if I have a buyer that's that close to qualifying. So you really have to know what your buyer is up against in order to make these things work. Week number 3. Now, this is one that you guys have probably heard a lot about because see all the different names. We've got land contract, installment land contract, a bond for a deed. It's all basically the same kind of technique. So seller finance purchases, it's really where somebody is going to commit to a monthly payment over a certain amount of time. And at the end of that time, they're going to get the title to the property. So this is one where if a seller, like my dad, sold his house back in Wisconsin this way, he didn't really need the money out. He was already retired, so he didn't need a cash out deal. So he seller financed to a buyer. Yes, I had a little something to do with that creative part because he was getting frustrated. I said, hey, why don't you just try it this way? And he did. And so it's nice because it can help a seller that is okay just getting a monthly payment. They don't really need all the cash out for something else. And it helps a buyer, again, get into a property where normally they might not be able to qualify. So if you think about them not getting title until the end, it does allow for the seller to be able to evict them like they're a tenant as opposed to foreclose on them if they've already gotten title. So you do need to be careful and clear on which type you want to do. But when you're doing a contract for deed, that's a pretty slick way to make it really good for the seller and the buyer. Steve, what do you have to add to that?
Well, one of the unique things about this kind of a deal is that while the seller retains title, as far as the lender goes, as far as the government goes, the owner is the buyer, even though his name isn't on the title just yet. He has the documentation to prove that it's a purchase, not a rental agreement. That's going to give him the tax write-offs. And so there's some real advantages to working with this kind of thing rather than just a straight out doing a mortgage deed. And so that's the difference between the contract for deed and the mortgage deed. It has to do with who owns the title and who gets the tax write-offs and the eviction process, like Christy mentioned. Mm-hmm. So there's some situations where this really fits very well.
Yep, absolutely. So how do you structure the deal? It's very similar to a rent-to-own, which makes it very nice and easy on the paperwork part. The buyer makes the monthly payments. They qualify for the takeout loan at the end. And then the seller just retains title. So it gives the seller that extra edge that they need to do the eviction instead of the foreclosure. Because I don't know if you guys are aware, but evictions are usually 3 weeks to about a month and a half, depending on the state. But foreclosures can take a long time, and they are on average going to be at least 6 months. So 3 months up to 9-ish for a foreclosure instead of an eviction is pretty normal. Again, depending on the state and depending on how savvy those buyers are to working the court system. So it's just not a situation you really want to get into where you're going to have to even potentially foreclose on the people, because it's a lot more expensive. It takes a lot more time and you just don't have as much control. So I don't ever recommend that if you're the seller, that you give the title away unless the people have a huge amount of cash into the deal. If they've just put a very small down payment in and you give up the title in exchange for that, it's not so good for you. Now, if you're the buyer, sure, go do that all day long every day with as small a down payments as you can, but always be trustworthy, obviously. Use your integrity. You will make the payments as the buyer, but you don't have that kind of guarantee working with the general public that they're going to always make their payments on time and not try to work the court system. I might have been in court a couple times over these kinds of things, and that's how I learned to be that strong in my recommendations for you. So trust me, it's a lot easier. Steve, what do you have to add?
I think that's good. All right, let's go ahead, move on.
All right. So today,
very good.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to do that one?
No, I said it was very good.
Oh, no. The next slide, do you see that the today's takeaway one?
Oh, sorry. Sure.
That's all right.
So this is a website that we wanted to just share with you, specifically about contract for deed. And this is actually, I believe it's a government website from, I think you guys have set this up, or actually in Michigan or Minnesota. However, you can go in, select your state, you get forms for whatever you need to do in order to make these things happen. There's a toll-free number there that you can call to get a little bit more information about that. But I just want you to understand that this is a very normal kind of a thing to do. It's legal. It sounds a little bit strange, but it's a strategy that's getting more and more traction. Mm-hmm. And there's one of those states, I wish I could remember, I think it was Minnesota, has projects that they sell exclusively with this kind of financing behind them. So just be aware of that. Anyway, here's where you can get some more information and some forms. And
I'll give you a little added takeaway. Whenever I do these kinds of deals, I really prefer to use an attorney that specializes in this kind of creative real estate. They're a little more savvy on reviewing the contract, making sure everything gets closed okay. You may or may not be in an attorney state that closings are required to go through attorneys. You might live in a title state. We're a title state, but we can choose to use attorneys. And it's just a personal preference. But the title companies around here are a little bit more straight down the traditional line, although I have found a couple that think a little bit more outside the box. But if you would like to make this nice and simple, if you find attorneys who have already done this kind of a closing, it goes way smoother. And they can give you some really good advice too about what is maybe trickier in your state than other states you might have worked in previously, or if you've never worked in a state and these are your first real estate deals that you're doing, super, super smart to have a good experienced real estate attorney on your team ASAP.
Let me add to that, because you bring up a really excellent point, Christine. And that is that some of these strategies are so out of the mainstream that you'll have people tell you, you can't do that, it's illegal. And they just are ill-informed. And you hear that a lot about wholesaling, for example. And if you could put together a team of people that do these things on a regular basis, that they're doing them so they know that not only they can do them, but they know how to do them, then you can avoid a lot of misinformation and a lot of problems in trying to put stuff together and being told that you can't and having a lot of delays. So that would include real estate agents, it would include closing officers at title companies, it would include attorneys, it would include accountants. You want people who are involved at professional level with exactly this sort of stuff, not just a general real estate attorney or a general real estate agent, but somebody who deals with these investments specifically. And you'll save yourself a lot of headaches.
Absolutely. So I don't know how many of you know my background, but in my 20s, late 20s, I started doing this creative real estate investing with my now ex-husband. But I didn't get my realtor's license for almost a decade. I think it was about 8 years later. And so when I got my first real estate broker, she actually told me what I was trying to do with lease options with clients was illegal. Well, I knew it wasn't because I had already done some closings with attorneys and I knew that it was okay, but it made her nervous. So that didn't make her a bad or a wrong person. It just means she didn't know. She didn't know what was actually legal in our state and she had just never encountered it. So I'm just telling you guys, if you ever hear, oh, you can't do that, the best thing you can do is, number one, not get scared, but number two, call a good experienced real estate attorney in your area and ask them, can I do this? And hey, by the way, do you have any forms for it? Because if they've already created some forms for their previous clients, you might be able to get them at a fraction of the cost instead of you having to pay to get them made up. And then if they've got those templates for you, boom, you're off and running. Number one, you're legal and covered. And number two, you don't have to waste more money than you need to. So let's talk about a wraparound mortgage, another one of my favorites. Maybe I have a lot of favorites in this series. The wraparound mortgage is so slick. I love it. We bought a fourplex this way, and it was a partnership dispute. So there were two partners that owned a property. They couldn't get along anymore, so they were just selling the property, and they wanted to sell it so quickly, they were more than happy to accept a seller finance offer. So we did a wraparound mortgage on that property. They already had the mortgage in place. All we had to do was give them a down payment. We created a new mortgage with agreements between them and us. We had all the details in there. So the underlying mortgage that was already on the property could stay there. And then we just made payments to them and it worked out smooth as silk. Steve, do you have any feelings about this technique?
No, other than it's good. Again, it's just a case of making sure that everybody that's involved knows the details, and things will run smoothly. But this is a good strategy for situations where you need to keep a loan in place. And just one caveat that I don't think we really cover in this presentation, but you want to make sure that whatever payments get made, it's made to a third party, and that third party then is responsible for dispersing it in places where it needs to go. That way no one has to worry about whether things are getting covered or things are actually being paid. So maybe that's a little extra nugget there.
That's so funny. That was exactly the thought that came to my mind as I was switching slides. So we do have a lot of slides to cover. You guys can hop off anytime you like. You can always get the recording. So if I talk too long, You just get some extra nuggets tonight. So this is not going to be one of our shorter webinars because I just have a lot of stories. This story in particular is why you want to be very careful that you do exactly what Steve just said. So on one deal that I did, I wasn't even that new of an investor, but I just hadn't ever had anybody do this to me before, so I didn't know any better. So I was making the payments. It actually was a sandwich thing where I had a tenant in the property and I had negotiated with a seller. So the tenant was paying me, I was keeping my difference, and I was paying the seller what I owed them. Well, at some point, the tenant living in the property said that there was a notice on the door and the bank was foreclosing. So that seller had been taking my payments after a while, not initially, just when they got a little bit tight on money. And that's a crazy thing. You can do really good deals with very good people, but when people get desperate for money, they're going to look for the fastest, easiest answer. And if they've got this extra money coming in that you're paying them on a property they don't even live in anymore, they're not so emotionally attached to keeping that property. And sometimes they're so desperate for the cash that they don't even care if they give up their credit or not. So they took that money and they started using it for their other bills, and then the house foreclosed. So you don't want to do that. The way that you avoid it is exactly what Steve said. So this is a takeaway, even though I don't think we have it on the actual slide as a takeaway, but write it down or just log it in your memory. A third party, like an escrow company. There's one that we have here called Escrow Specialists. They're fantastic. They're not that expensive. And then that way the payment gets paid into the third party company. That company pays out to the other parties involved. So they can pay directly to the seller's mortgage and they can pay you as the investor the difference. You can take that difference monthly or quarterly or once a year, whatever you decide you want to do. So all that extra money can just be sitting there accruing and making a nice little savings account for you. In essence, a little savings investing account. And that is how you make sure you keep that payment out of the seller's hands and the payment gets paid for sure. That's especially important if you have this underlying mortgage that we've been mentioning a couple of times. So keep in mind, when it comes down to it, if you have a mortgage between you and the seller that you've created or some kind of a contract, the underlying mortgage is always going to have precedence. If there's a problem on the property, they're going to get their money first, which means any money you put in the deal and you pay the seller directly, it could be at risk. You need to be very careful about how that money is set up, and you want to make sure that you have control over how those payments are paid. Steve, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, just keep in mind that it's kind of like being at a buffet, which is kind of what this picture depicts here. If the guy ahead of you eats all the chicken, you're not getting any chicken, right? If you're a junior lien holder and the guy ahead of you takes all of the money that's available, you aren't going to be getting any. So it becomes really important to make sure that things get recorded timely, that you really understand what position that you're in. And if you buy into a position, that you understand what all of the ramifications of that are. So the position of liens is very, very important, especially when it comes down to people getting paid off either because of foreclosure or a transfer for some reason.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So the importance of being first in line is critical in a lot of different ways. We're not going to have time to cover all of those tonight, but just know that if you decide that this kind of creative financing is for you and you want to be walked through some of these details, we're more than happy to help you with that. We can also do, a few questions here and there through the website or through the Facebook page. Generally speaking, and we'll go over it at the end, you're going to get the best help if you pay for the coaching and you can ask us questions every single week or as you have deals coming up, whatever is important to you. But there are a lot of little things you need to be aware of, and some of those are related to this lien priority. Not so critical if you're going to do conventional real estate, but if you're going to do creative real estate, it's very essential. It's very essential that you know, for example, if you need to record a notice of interest against the property, when and how you'd want to do that, how you want to cloud a title so nobody can sell it out from underneath you in case you're doing some of these things where you are not the first lien holder. Places to find seller finance deals. Steve, why don't you cover the takeaway on this?
Okay, this is basically just another list of some places where you can go to find deals. And you may be looking for properties for rent and then converting that over into a sell opportunity. But looking in newspapers, MLS listings, Craigslist, etc., we just wanted to give you a list of places that you go search and start jumping on it today, even finding some of these deals.
Now, I know one person here tonight for sure could take advantage of this. LoopNet is where there are a lot of commercial properties, multifamily properties. You're going to find, if you scour through LoopNet, some sellers that want to get rid of their properties and they're going to be willing to seller finance. A lot of them are rentals. They decide they just either want to cash out, but they're willing to wait for some or all of the cash, or they're just tired landlords. They just don't want to deal with tenants anymore. So this one, if you're trying to do anything like a sandwich lease option or any of these contract for deeds, it's an excellent place to look. On week 5, we go into buying subject to, and that is a term you may have heard around the real estate investing clubs and the real estate world in general. But what it really means, it means that you're buying subject to any existing liens that are already on that property. So this is one of the safest seller financing strategies out there. There are 2 different ways that you're going to hear subject to in real estate. If you look down here at the bottom, it says subject to as an escape clause or subject to existing liens. So, Steve, why don't you explain the difference between those 2? I'm kind of tired of hearing myself talk.
Sure. So as an escape clause, it might be subject to seller, it could be subject, seller financing could be subject to obtaining financing from a bank, could be subject to inspection, which is a very common one. And basically what they're saying in that subject to clause is if that this agreement is good, as long as everything that we talk about in this agreement takes place or passes inspection, or we get what we need to do to close the deal. And that's the one kind of subject to which can kill a deal if things don't happen right. The phrase subject to existing liens basically means that the buyer is going to take responsibility at some level for paying the liens that are on the property right now. And the seller never really totally relinquishes responsibility, but if push comes to shove, if they don't make that payment, then it's going to go into foreclosure. But the real responsibility lies with whoever the buyer is. They're taking on that debt, and so what that's saying then is that this deal will happen if the buyer agrees to make those payments.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you very much. So there are things that you need to get set up. We've kind of referenced it in different directions as far as having a team, but remember that if you're going to do this kind of technique, a title search, so therefore an attorney or a title company or both would be important to get that done. And you want to make sure that you're not inheriting any liens or craziness with that property when you take it over, because remember that at some point title will transfer, and from that day forward, you are really responsible for everything that is with that property. That might be a judgment. It might be a tax lien from the previous owners. Technically, tax liens are supposed to transfer with the owner, but it doesn't mean it can't mess up your purchase of that property or make a real pain and cost you some money to get that cleared up. So if you do a title search initially and you make sure that you have title insurance on that property, then from that day forward, whenever that title company agrees to insure that title, you don't have to worry about it anymore. That's what you're paying for, is for them to say, hey, we've checked all these other places, not just the county recorder's office where most liens and judgments and things are supposed to be recorded, but we've checked everywhere that we can to make sure that title is clear, because we want to make sure that nothing pops up that we have to pay for. For example, you might pay a $1,500 title insurance policy, but I have heard of very large liens, $34,000 to $120,000 being against a property, and you don't want to be responsible for paying those liens or judgments off when you take over the property. You would want the title company to have to pay those off. That's the whole point of getting title insurance. Insurance, just regular property owner insurance, landlord policies, whatever it is that you need on the property, make sure that you add yourself to the existing policy as a beneficiary. They can call them additional insureds. Different insurance companies call them slightly different names, but the whole point is that if you're taking over a property creatively and the owner has an insurance policy on there, you want to make sure if something happens to the property that you can also access that the payout on the insurance policy, and that you can make sure that the property gets fixed if it got damaged or whatever happened to it, that you are able to benefit from that. That's this whole word of beneficiary. Just like on a life insurance policy, you'd want to be the beneficiary of your property insurance as well. And then you should, this is another one of those little tidbits that everybody's not going to teach you, and you might get yourself in a lot of, I wouldn't say necessarily a lot of trouble, but into a lot of headache if you don't have a limited power of attorney. Now, the seller might not want to give you a power of attorney because they think it gives you control of everything, but it doesn't. You'll notice this right here says limited. You can limit that power of attorney to just that property. So they know that if you need to call and fix something with the mortgage company, on the escrow account, on the insurance, anything like that, that you'd have the power and ability to do that, but you're not actually taking over the information on their residence, like their personal residence or their car or their life insurance or anything else that as a general power of attorney, you'd have the power to do. So there's a lot of stuff there. Steve actually put a lot on your takeaway for that slide. So hopefully you took good notes on that. Yeah, wow. Okay, there's a lot on there. I hope that you picked up at least 5 or 6 little nuggets out of what was just shared there. And then Steve, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, you did very well. Thank you.
You bet. And then in week 6, when we do the live ones, when we do the live webinars, we do a live review as well. So if something's not clear, you can ask questions. We want to make sure by the end of week 6, you understand a lot of the details and the timeline of how to make these things work, depending on whatever technique that you want to use. In the recorded webinars, this will just be some additional information that we'll throw in there. But really for week 6, we want you to know what you're going to do, what's your plan, what's your exit strategy, and what is your backup plan, as deep as maybe an A, B, and a D plan. So if you have 4 different ways you can exit that property, minimum, more if you like, you should be covered, and that's great. Lovely little picture that Steve picked here for you. Sometimes life happens and emergencies happen and things happen you can't count on, so it's always good to have a backup plan, no matter what. Okay. Some of this we already covered, so let's sort through it a little bit. As a buyer, you want to protect yourself from default. You definitely want to make sure that you are as solid in a deal as you possibly can be with your deadlines between sellers and buyers, especially if you're sandwiching these kind of creative strategies together. Make sure that you have extended timeframes for the buyer that go longer than the timeframes you have with the seller. You want to have alternative financing options available, even on the front end. Let's say that you really wanted to get a hard money loan, but that hard money lender fell through. Nice to have a private investor as a backup, or vice versa. And sometimes if your longer term financing falls through, it's still a good idea to go ahead and put short-term financing on it and then just turn around and resell the place, maybe making less money, but still making some money. So again, with your financing, how you're getting into the property, how you're getting back out of the property, it's good to have options. And then managing your credit, your reserves, making sure your buyer and their reserves are sufficient to do the takeout loan so they can purchase at the end. All of these are super important. As a seller, you want to protect yourself as much as possible from your buyer defaulting. So number one, you should always be prepared to take the property back. If you've positioned yourself well enough and you've kept an eye on the property to know they haven't trashed it in the in-between while they've been in there or during their period of ownership, you should be able to take the property back and not lose money. Maybe you have to put a little bit of money back into it, like rehab a little more, update it a little bit more, put it back on the market and get a new buyer. But very seldom are you going to lose money putting it back on the market a second time. And sometimes it's actually to your advantage because in the meantime, the housing prices have risen and you're able to put it back on the market at a higher price. So it's not always a bad thing, but do be prepared to take it back just in case. And then reselling repossessed properties and helping your buyer's credit and reserves get fixed up. Remember, connecting them with your team as far as credit repair companies, loan officers that can help keep them on track to make sure they're doing the things they need to get the takeout loan at the end. Steve, do you have anything to add on exit strategies?
No, that's good.
Okay. Very good. So why don't you cover today's takeaways and then we'll get towards wrapping up.
So if the end of every seller finance deal is you need to have a new loan come out and replace the old one, you want to make sure again that the credit's good and it's going to be able to qualify for the loan. So a lot of times people get into credit or into seller finance deals because of credit issues. Some of them will resolve easily. Some of them take a bit of work. There are companies out there that take people's payments and then they go negotiate in their behalf with creditors, and they'll make partial payments or whatever. What you really want to understand about that process is that as far as the credit bureau is concerned and your credit score and credit report, that's almost as damaging, if not even more damaging, than having a bankruptcy on your credit. So you don't want to go there in order to solve the credit issues. One of the places you can go that won't cause those kind of problems is to go to a loan officer, a loan originator. And those guys often have relationships with different companies, especially with the credit bureaus, and they can actually call on your behalf and work with the creditor to get something sewn up. And they can sometimes mitigate the damage that's been done. And I've seen people report a late payment and completely turn around to as paid as agreed. And so things like that don't hurt your credit. So you really want to find somebody that can help you get as qualified as possible that you can, as well as anybody that you're working with on the other side of the deal, so that this gets cleaned up and that you don't run into problems down the road when you try to get the balloon payment paid off or refinancing that original loan.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And kind of to flip, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, just so the tip here is don't wait. Go interview some guys right now and find out what needs to get done. And that'll get you ahead of the game. If you wait until you're into a situation, then it's going to delay things.
Yeah. And I have several stories about this, so I'll give you little tidbits of them. One is that not all mortgage brokers are created equally. I know one mortgage guy that will literally pull credit and sit you down and say, here's what you need to do. You've got to pay this balance down this much on this credit card. We need to refinance your car to get your car loan payment down low enough that you can qualify. You know, some of these loan officers are amazing at what they do. They've been doing it for years and years. So just like we've seen a lot of the goods and a lot of the bads, they've done the same thing. I remember one gal that didn't qualify because of a $17 credit ding that was years and years old, but it had been sitting on there and it had messed up her credit enough that she literally couldn't qualify in time for the house that she wanted. You don't want to be that person. You don't want your buyer to be that person. So that's why it's important to do like Steve suggested and get you and or your buyer there ASAP. Also, I have a really good friend who used a loan officer that I didn't know last year. And he told her, you should do this with your credit, and found out later that that actually was worse on her credit than if she had just left it alone. So he had her pay something specific off. I know it might seem what's anti-intuitive? I don't even know what that word is. I don't know where my brain's going with words. Counterintuitive, thank you. So counterintuitive to not pay something off. You'd think, well, if it's a credit card balance or a loan balance, it'd be great to get that paid off and get rid of it. But remember that credit doesn't work exactly like you probably think that it does. So sometimes it's better to leave something on there existing or just pay it down partway, but leave a minimal balance on there because of what it does with scores. So when she had paid this one debt off, it actually dinged her score down low enough. Then she had to wait an extra 2 or 3 months, I believe it was, until her credit cycled a few more times and came back up again. So things like that happen. No, maybe you can't avoid every single little problem like that. But again, the importance of having really experienced loan people in your back pocket that you can connect people with. And then one last thing, when we go to the other end of the spectrum, yes, we're talking about creative financing, not needing to use your credit, but credit is a powerful tool. We will do a credit webinar here fairly soon because I'm seeing a lot of misunderstanding of what credit does. And I don't even know all the ins and outs. I'm not a credit repair company, but I've worked with enough clients and dealt with it enough in different ways that I can see that there are certain things to do with credit and certain things not to do. And it's all about strategizing for when you do need your credit. Some of the things you have to play around with for 3, 6, 12 months in order to get your score up over 720 or up over 800 so that you can get the very, very best loans. So that being said, remember again, your professionals are going to be the ones that can walk you through these things. And as you're interviewing them, this is the whole takeaway. We again don't have a slide for, but I want to add this today. The takeaway is that when you are getting ready to do any of this kind of stuff, yes, you'll find sellers willing to do it, but you're going to find more sellers not willing to do these deals with you. And if you are prepared and you have your credit ready for whenever that day is, get yourself in a position where if they will not do seller financing, but it's an amazing deal, yes, it costs closing costs. Yes, you might have to wait the 30 to 45 days to get the loan in place for yourself, but you don't want to miss that opportunity if you don't have to. So while you're doing all this creative stuff, make sure that you as well get your credit pulled, get suggestions on how to fix it up either yourself or hire a credit repair company to do that for you. And then make sure that you're working on your credit at the same time that your end buyers and other people that you're working with are working on their credit as well. It's just the smart thing to do. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was really great. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so some other things that we offer. We do have many more webinar series than just seller financing. We do one-on-one appointments as well. If you package your coaching as a bundle, you'll have one-on-one appointments added to that anyway because we found them to be very valuable. Information is good, but accountability and being able to ask questions live with mentors is even better. And then daily group accountability calls, we do those Monday through Friday. You can join a life coaching one, you can join a real estate coaching one, whatever kind of daily accountability you need, that will be available for you. And then group coaching for businesses. If you're involved in a business that could take advantage of any of, yes, the real estate products, but also in a second, I'm going to show you some of the other things that we have available that businesses, either your own, one that you're an employee for, you might want to recommend to your boss, or if you're getting ready to start a company, there are definitely things we cover specific to just business startup and business growth, and then also making sure that you get the right employees or independent contractors in the right positions in the company based on their skill sets and their personality types. We also have contracts and scripts available for you if you guys need those, specifically real estate, but we also have life coaching ones. And some of the life coaching that we offer, I'm going to have Steve go through that with you. Depending on where you're at, you guys might be holding yourself back from being really successful in real estate because of other issues, time management issues, money management issues, problems in your marriage, problems with kids. There are a lot of things that can get in our way to keep us from being successful. And some of it's just between the ears. It's just mindset. We work with people on all of those different topics. So as far as the real estate investing specifically, We also have the wholesaling, the rentals, the fixing and flipping, the bank-owned and foreclosures, the commercial, and the mobile home parks and storage units webinar series. Those are all 6 weeks, each 6 weeks. So Steve, why don't you cover a little bit more about the life coaching and personal development that we can do?
Okay. So Christina and I used to have a coach and a mentor that I would often say that financial success follows personal progress. And so, as she mentioned, there's just sometimes things that we have in our lives, habits or mindset issues that keep us from getting where we really want to go. And so we want to be able to help people through those things. And we've been doing that actually for several years now. And we have people come to us for all kinds of issues that go on. And sometimes it's just like moving a little bit of a boulder out of the mountain pass, and then the waters can flow. But we cover things like time management, money management, and wealth building. We just go over some of the principles that are applicable to building wealth and hanging on to it. Sometimes divorce is the issue, or relationship issues, and we've got some help in those areas as well. Grief and loss recovery, as well as addiction recovery. So you can see there's some pretty big issues that go on there. And we're happy to work with people on any of those that might be keeping them from being where they want to go.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, if you get a coaching package with us, we don't have to separate all these things out. You don't have to just purchase a real estate webinar or just purchase life coaching. The way that we coach tends to be very holistic. So if you tell us, hey, we're having a really hard time with this, or, for the next 6 months or so, I'm going through this life change, then that's something that we can incorporate into your one-on-one coaching and your even daily accountability if you need on a daily basis to make sure that you're doing something. And just to be super transparent, after every divorce I've been through, I've always gone to a counselor. I think that there are definite benefits to being able to talk to somebody outside of your own head. So no, we're not licensed counselors. No, we are not attorneys. We are not licensed in certain ways. What we are life, business, and real estate coaches. And we can mentor you through things that we've been through ourselves. So anything on this list, one or the other of us or both of us have gone through them all. So we know what it feels like. We know we've been there. And we are happy to incorporate the different types of coaching that we do wrapped into one package for you, so that as you're maybe going through a divorce, you're still building your real estate business. Or if you're suffering a loss of a child or a spouse or a parent and it's really kicking your can, then we can help you stay accountable with keeping life on track. And it's hard sometimes. We know that. We know that life gets in the way of business success a lot of times. And so whether it's between your ears or inside of your house or account or wherever it is, we are very happy to help you through those things and rise to the level of success that you want to. If there are things that you keep saying, I really want to do this, or I know I want that, but you're not getting there, there's something holding you back. There's something in your way. We're happy to help you figure out what that is and then move past it. That's one thing that gives us great fulfillment and joy in what we get to do. So business development covers business startup, entity, and taxes. Definitely different issues than just getting a paycheck. You need to know how to structure yourself legally with entities and also financially with taxes. Marketing and sales. Do you hire employees, independent contractors, or a combination of the two? And then scaling and duplicating within the company, and leadership development of yourself and possibly of other employees or managers that you are training in your company. So if you would like more information, we're here for your questions. We're going to open it up for live Q&A here in just a minute, but also we are at this address. I don't know if that's an actual address, this page on Facebook, Accelerated Real Estate Investing. We are at this website address here, iliveaccelerated.com. At this phone number, texting is best, but a voicemail will do as well. And then we also have a YouTube channel, which is just getting started right now, but it's going to be populated immensely over the next year. So if you'd like to subscribe now and then see all the new stuff as it comes out, that might be a really good thing for you to do. We always like to share some success principles, some real estate tips, lots of different things mixed together. So hopefully we'll see you subscribe down there. And let's go ahead. Well, let me check first, actually. Steve, do you have anything that you want to add to any of those last slides?
No, other than we just really enjoy working with you folks and would love to be able to help you in any way that we can. So it's been great having you here tonight. If you saw something here of value, I hope you got a feel for how much detail there is just in the seller financing world. But, you'll see similar things with all the other programs that we have. There's a lot of detail and would love to be able to just download it all and help you get where you need to go. So just know we're there to support you, and that's what floats our boat.
Amen. Thanks so much, Steve.